Chapter 16, Boards and Committees. 49. Boards. The essential characteristics of a board are stated in 122 through 23. All of the material under the heading Types of Deliberative Assembly in 19 through 23 should be read in connection with this section. The authority by which a board is constituted commonly prescribes the times at which it shall hold regular meetings, and the procedure by which special meetings of the board can be called, or the board can establish such provisions to the extent that it has the authority to adopt its own rules. See 49:15. The executive board of an organized society. Except in the simplest and smallest local societies, or those holding very frequent regular meetings, it is generally found advisable to provide in the bylaws for a board to be empowered to act for the society when necessary between its regular meetings, and in some cases to have complete control over certain phases of the society's business. Such a board is usually known as the executive board, or in organizations where there is an executive committee within and subordinate to the board as described below, the board of directors, board of managers, or board of trustees. Any such body is referred to in this book as an executive board, however, regardless of whether there is an executive committee, in cases where the distinction is immaterial. If a society is to have an executive board, the bylaws should specify the number of board members and how they are to be determined, should define the board's duties and powers, and should make provision for meetings of the board as stated above. An executive board commonly consists of those of the society's officers, 47, who also have duties apart from the board, together with a number of directors, managers, or trustees who may or may not have other duties such as the chairmanship of important standing committees. 50. See Simple Bylaws, Article 4, Section 1, 5662, and Article 6, Section 1, 5664. The directors usually should be elected in the same way and at the same time as the other officers of the society. Frequently it is provided that a specified percentage of the directors shall be chosen periodically in such a way that the terms of office overlap those of the others, as when, for example, there are 6 directors and it is provided that 2 of them shall be elected at each annual meeting for 3-year terms. A society has no executive board, nor can its officers act as a board, except as the bylaws may provide, and when so established, the board has only such powers as is delegated to it by the bylaws or by vote of the society's assembly referring individual matters to it. The amount of regular power delegated to an executive board under the bylaws varies considerably from one organization to another. If the society as a whole usually meets less often than within quarterly time intervals, 9-7, or if its main purpose is other than to transact business, the entire administrative authority of the society is best left to the board between the society's meetings. Usually in organizations meeting monthly or oftener, and sometimes in those meeting quarterly, the board is not given so much power since the society can attend much of its business at its regular meetings. For appropriate wordings for the governing provision in the bylaws in each of these 2 cases, see 5643 and 5664-2. In any event, no action of the board can alter or conflict with any decision made by the assembly of the society, and any such action of the board is null and void. See 5641 and 23-9, except in matters placed by the bylaws exclusively under the under the control of the board. The society's assembly can give the board instructions which it must carry out, and can rescind or amend any action of the board if it is not too late. See 35. It should be noted, however, that exactly the opposite condition prevails in connection with boards or business corporations, in which the board has exclusive power and authority to operate the business. Ex officio board members. Frequently, boards include ex officio members, that is, persons who are members of the board by virtue of an office or committee chairmanship held in the society, or in the parent state or national society or federation or some allied group, or, sometimes in boards instead of organized societies, by virtue of a public office. In the executive board of a society, if the ex officio member of the board is under the authority of the society, that is, if he is a member, an employer, or an elected or appointed officer of the society, there is no distinction between him and the other board members. If the ex officio member is not under the authority of the society, he has all the privileges of board membership, including the right to make motions and to vote, but none of the obligations, just as in case, for example, where the governor of a state is ex officio a trustee of a private academy. The latter class of ex officio board member, who has no obligation to participate, is not counted in determining the number required for a quorum or whether a quorum is present at a meeting. Whenever an ex officio board member is also ex officio an officer of the board, he of course has the obligation to serve as a regular working member and is therefore counted in the quorum. When an ex officio member of the board ceases to hold the office that entitles him to such membership, his membership on the board terminates automatically. Concerning ex officio members of committees, including the president, see 50:16. Officers of boards. A board that has not an instrumentality of a parent assembly or membership bodies organizes any deliberative assembly with a chairman, note C310 regarding variations of this term that have come into use, back to reading, or a president, a secretary, and other officers as may be needed. In general, such a board elects its own officers if the authority under which the board is constituted makes no other provision as to how the officers are to be determined. A board that is to elect its officers should meet for this purpose as soon as possible after the selection of its members. See also 4922. In ordinary societies having executive boards, on the other hand, the president and the secretary of the society serve in the same capacities within the board, and the executive committee, if there is one, unless the bylaws provide otherwise. Body subordinate to a board. As a general example, a board cannot delegate its authority, that is, it cannot empower a subordinate group to act independently in its name, except as may be authorized by the bylaws of the society or other instrument under which the board is constituted. But any board can appoint committees to work under its supervision or according to its specific instructions. Such committees of the board always report to the board. Executive Committee. In a society where the board is larger, its members must travel from a distance to meet. It is usual for the bylaws to establish an executive committee, composed of a specified number of board members, which shall have all or much of the power of the board between meetings, just as the board has all or much of the power of the society between the society's meetings, but which cannot alter any decision made by the board, just as the board cannot alter any decision made by the society. The executive committee is thus in reality a board within a board, and operates under the rules in this book applicable to boards rather than those applicable to committees. Usually, the membership of the executive committee is specified in the bylaws rather than being left to the choice of the full board. It is advisable that the executive committee be small and, unless it has been authorized to conduct electronic meetings, see 930 through 36, that its members live near enough to each other to be able to hold frequent regular meetings and also special meetings when necessary. The executive secretary, if there is one, should work closely with the executive committee, but should be appointed by the parent body or at least by the board. A board cannot appoint an executive committee unless the bylaws so authorize. Committees of a board. Where an organization is local, for example, a society for sustaining a foster home for children, the executive board usually divides itself into committees having charge of different branches of the work during the interval between the monthly or quarterly meetings of the board. At the board meetings, these committees report on the fulfillment of their assigned responsibilities. In such cases, the committees are generally subordinate to the board and must ordinarily report back to it for authority to act, in contrast to an executive committee, which usually has the power to act as the board, and in contrast to standing committees of the society, which are not subordinate to the board unless made so by provision in the bylaws. Any board can appoint committees of the kind just described without authorization in the bylaws. Conduct of business and boards. General procedure. The executive board of an organized society operates under the society's bylaws, the society's parliamentary authority, and any special rules of order or standing rules of the society which may be applicable to it. Such a board may adopt its own special rules of order or standing rules only to the extent that such rules do not conflict with any of the rules of the society listed above. It may protect itself against breaches of order by its members during board meetings, and against annoyance by non-members by employing the procedures outlined in 6110 through 21, but the maximum penalty which may be imposed upon a disorderly member of the board is that he be required to leave the meeting room during the remainder of the meeting. A board that is not a part of a society can adopt its own rules, provided that they do not conflict with anything in the legal instrument under which the board is constituted. Under the general parliamentary law, business is transacted in large boards according to the same rules of procedure as in other deliberative assemblies. In smaller boards, these rules apply as far as practicable, with the exceptions noted below. In any case, a board can transact business only in a regular or properly called meeting of which every board member has at least been sent any required notice. See 9.2 through 5 and 9.13 through 16, or an adjournment of one of these meetings. Note, for an adjourned meeting 9.17 through 19, no additional notice is required, except, of course, when it is to meet at the call of the chair rather than at a specified time, although it is desirable to give such notice if feasible. Back to reading. And at which a quorum, see 45, note that it is chapter 40, paragraph 5, is present. The personal approval of a proposed action obtained separately by telephone, by individual interviews, or in writing, even from every member of the board, is not the approval of the board, since the members lack the opportunity to mutually debate and decide the matter as a deliberative body. See also electronic meetings 930 through 36. A record of the board's proceedings is kept by the secretary, just as in any other assembly. Only members of the board have the right to examine the minute book kept by the secretary. Consider 4736. Unless the board orders otherwise, see next paragraph. Board members are, however, free to share the content of the minutes with others, except for any content protected by the secrecy of an executive session that has not been lifted. See 926 through 27. The board can order that any specified person or persons, including, for example, all members of the society, be permitted to view or to be furnished with copies of board minutes. A motion to do so is an incidental main motion, which can be adopted by a majority vote if the minutes are not protected by executive session secrecy. If they are protected by such secrecy, the motion requires a two-thirds vote, the vote of a majority of the entire membership of the board, or a majority vote if previous notice has been given. Whether or not board minutes are protected by the secretary of an executive session, the assembly of the society can adopt a motion granting such permission, or can order that the board's minutes be produced and read in a meeting of the assembly by a two-thirds vote, the vote of a majority of the entire membership of the assembly, or a majority vote if previous notice has been given. At regular board meetings, the executive committee, if there is one, should be required to make a report of its activities since the last board meeting. No action need be taken on this report, which is generally intended as information only. Procedure in small boards. In a board meeting where there are not more than about a dozen members present, some of the formality that is necessary in a large assembly would hinder business. The rules governing such meetings are different from the rules that hold in other assemblies in the following respects. 1. Members may raise a hand instead of standing when seeking to obtain the floor and may remain seated while making motions or speaking. 2. Motions need not be seconded. 3. There is no limit to the number of times a member can speak to a debatable question. Note, however, motions to close or limit debate, chapters 15 and 16, including motions to limit the number of times a member can speak to a question, are in order even in meetings of a small board, but not in meetings of a committee, see 5025, although occasions where they are necessary or appropriate may be rarer than in large assemblies. Back to reading. Appeals, however, are debatable under the regular rules. That is, each member, except the chair, can speak only once and debate on them, while the chair may speak twice. 4. Informal discussion of a subject is permitted while no motion is pending. 5. When a proposal is perfectly clear to all present, a vote can be taken without motions having been introduced. Unless agreed to by unanimous consent, however, all proposed actions must be approved by vote under the same rules as in larger meetings, except that a vote can be taken initially by a show of hands, which is often a better method in small meetings. 6. The chairman need not rise while putting questions to a vote. 7. If the chairman is a member, he may, without leaving the chair, speak in informal discussions and in debate and vote on all questions. Back to note. Informal discussion may be initiated by the chairman himself, which, in effect, enables the chairman to submit his own proposals without formally making a motion, as described in 4 through 8, although he has the right to make a motion if he wishes. Back to reading. Effective periodic partial change in board membership. In cases where a board is constituted so that a specified portion of its membership is chosen periodically, as for example where 1/3 of the board is elected annually for 3-year terms, it becomes in effect a new board each time such a group assumes board membership. Consequently, when the outgoing portion of the board vacates membership, all matters temporarily but not finally disposed of, see 9.8 through 11 and 38.8, except those that remains in the hands of a committee to which they have been referred, fall to the ground under provision C and 21.7. See also 50.30 regarding the continuity of matters that have been referred to a special committee appointed by the board. If the board is one that elects its own officers or appoints standing committees, it chooses new officers and committees just as soon as the new board members have taken up their duties, just as if the entire board membership had changed. The individual replacement of persons who may occasionally vacate board membership at other times, however, does not have these effects.